Welcome to the 3% Podcast. This is Chad Post from Open Letter Books, and I'm here with, as always, with Tom Roberts from Riff Raff.
Hello, hello.
And this week we have special guest Kevin Williams from Talonbooks on to talk to us about Canadian publishing, about his history in publishing in the book business, and all sorts of questions we've always wanted to find out about how the Canadian publishing scene works. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be able to talk to you on here, because we've talked a lot at various conferences, at the sales conference that we do, since we're both distributed through Consortium, and you have a good history with book publishing and a lot of great stories I think a lot of our listeners will appreciate.
I've had a pretty lucky career in book publishing, and I'm grateful for that. I've had some really good results along the way, which unfortunately, may have been a thing of the past and hard to duplicate. But yeah, so it's certainly been a good ride for me. I've been in the book business, way too long, 41 or 42 years. I started when I was 19, and I went to work at an independent bookstore in Vancouver called Duthie Books, which was the dominant independent at the time. Mm-hmm. And they had a really wonderful store that was around 3,000 square feet. It was a big independent at the time with a paperback cellar in the basement and hardcovers upstairs. It was the beginning of the big role of full color picture book publishing. So that was fabulous. We didn't really know that it was probably, in my opinion, the heyday of independent book selling. We sold a ton of books. Aside from getting the supply of the books from Toronto and stuff like that wasn't so good, but everything else was pretty fabulous. And we were right in the middle of the downtown core. I went on to become the manager of that store, and I did a lot of advertising for them and helped them run a book review journal. And I worked there for 10 years, and it was fantastic. And I probably I love book selling dearly, and I probably never would have left, but it didn't pay that well. So
that's always a little problem.
It is. And I kind of went to the owners and suggested they pay me more. And they said, well, do you know how much, like a manager at a chain store makes? And I'm like, well, I don't really care. And so I was fortunate to get obviously it's a small community always, so people knew who I was. And I was fortunate to get a good job offer from the guys who owned Raincoast Books and Book Express, which was a wholesaler. And they also had a sales agency, Stanton McDougall. So at the time, the sales agency was the biggest part, and then the wholesale division. And then they'd started this distribution division because people said, well, you've got a rep company and you've got a wholesaler, so why don't you do distribution? And so they did. And so they offered me a job to come on board as sales and marketing director. So it's kind of odd to skip right over a lot of interim steps like being a rep and all that stuff and go right into that. But they had Chronicle Books, which was still relatively, early days for them. And they had Lonely Planet, which hadn't, become Lonely Planet quite. It was good, but things were that didn't work that well for distribution in Canada. And so I thought, man, if I can't make something of those two lines, then I don't know what I'm doing. So I went there, had a fantastic run, at Raincoast. We did, grow with those publishers. We got other great publishers along the way from down the Bay Area and in Seattle. And then we started getting some UK publishers in the door. The wholesale company was originally just kind of getting a commission on the sales. And I did some modeling. And so we switched it to a regular wholesaler, buying at 50, selling at 40. The margins. So they went from like 9 to 16%. They started making money. We made some decisions like we would merge the wholesale and distribution orders together, and it would be first in, first out. So we were turning the distribution orders out the door in 24 hours. So faster turns, better input into the stores, help drive sales, as well as, a lot of slick marketing stuff. So that was all good. And because we were providing the great service, our reputation grew as a distributor. So we were able to grow. So in my course of when I arrived there, we were doing like less than $1 million. And at the peak of my time there, we probably did as much as $90 million and, grew the staff out to 120 people. So along the way, we had some pretty interesting journeys. So one of which was I had been doing some kind of a little bit of work as an agent on the side when I was a bookseller to learn more about that process, because there wasn't really any publishing schools and stuff at the time. I had some interesting projects in hand, and I told the guys at Raincoast that I would put that business into Raincoast so I wouldn't be at a conflict of interest if they paid me for it somewhere down the line, because when I went to them, I had already learned that. Somebody told me, you're always going to be driving a business. You may need to make sure you're on the ownership side. So I told them I wanted to be a partner when I first arrived. As luck would have it, I sold Griffin and Sabine to Chronicle Books. And so I sold them Griffin and Sabine. We bought back the Canadian edition. So I got them to manufacture it and I bought them back from them. So obviously that went on to be a big bestseller and certainly, helped my position in terms of eventually becoming a partner there because I could say, hey, look, we earned a bunch of money from that book. We did a couple of big projects along the way, like those big chronicles, like Chronicle of America, Chronicle of Canada, Chronicle of the World. They were big $60 books that sold a ton back in the day. And we did a deal with that guy and published that in Canada. So we started publishing some books along the way. First, we had a lot of packages that we bought. So when you're a distributor, part of the problem is sometimes the books that publishers promise you don't show up. And so consequently, your revenue projections get a little bit kind of whiffy. So we would buy packages because packagers have to deliver because if they don't, they're out of business. And so we had the packaging thing, we had the Griffin and Sabine thing, we had the Chronicles thing. We started originating a few books and we built up the publishing program. I was selling rights on the side when we went to Frankfurt. Then I started selling rights for a lot of other publishers because it's really hard to sell rights when you don't have enough books.
Yeah.
And somewhere in that process, we were always signing new lines, but we signed Kingsbury along the way. And so I was buying and selling kids' books with them and as a publisher as well as distributing their books. And so then the opportunity, so then they had to publish the second Harry Potter. They had an option for it. They were bidding against Scholastic. And so they asked us if we wanted to do a joint venture to publish the second Harry Potter. So, we said yes. Seems like a no-brainer now, but at the time we'd only sold like about 1,000 copies of the first one in paperback.
Oh, wow.
Made a bid based on selling more like 30,000 of the second and third and cover. So it was a big bid at the time, but then the Scholastic published a book, broke big. We sold a few 100,000 copies of 2 and 3. And so that was obviously all good. And then with 4, we had to print like 500,000 and we were out the same day.
Wow.
And, various other disasters along the way. But so anyway, that was all good. And obviously Harry Potter helped really build the reputation of the firm and didn't hurt me personally. So yeah, so that was the whole journey through Raincoast from 1988 or 89 all the way through to 2007. And I left them and not too long after that, about 6 months after that, my wife Vicky and I bought Talonbooks, which is one of Canada's oldest independent publishers. We celebrated our 50th year of book publishing last year. We've got about 700 books in print. It's a very literary place. Our main, we publish poetry, drama, books about Indigenous studies, and French translation from Quebec. So as I joke, because I came from selling a lot of trade books, like, all of which are things that don't really sell.
Yep. I have to say, I really love the bit in the About Us for Talonbooks where it says, in the early 1980s, the press experimented with publishing highly successful commercial titles. However, we found that these not only took too much time away from new literary work, but also threatened by putting at too great a risk the company's solid literary backlist. For these reasons, the press returned to its original exclusively literary mandate in 1985.
Well, the guy I bought it from was Carl Ziegler, and the guy who kind of originally started was David Robinson. And David Robinson was a really good cookbook publisher. He published Umberto Mangi and this books by Susan Mendelson called like Mama Never Cooked Like That. They were the first of some of the ring-bound cookbooks with 4-color in them, and they sold bazillions of them, like 60, 70, 80. They sold a lot of them. And but Carl sort of felt that it was going to kind of change the orientation of Talon and with the possible government funders, and that it was going to suck up a lot of cash flow, and that it was a big gamble and all this kind of stuff. I mean, obviously I wasn't here at the time. I'm not sure I would have agreed with them. So anyway, they had a big fight and David left and Carl ended up buying the firm and, took it in the direction it is today, which is, turned out well. Maybe in retrospect, it might have been nice to spin out some kind of other imprint, but long and short of it, it didn't. So now we publish, 24 books a year, 24, 25 books a year. We do 20, 30, 40 reprints. A lot of our sales are academic course adoptions, probably 40, 50, 60% of them. And, we always, our list is really regular. We have like 4 books of poetry, 4 books of drama, a couple of translations, and a couple of nonfiction titles. That's what we do pretty much twice a year, every season, spring and fall, in the kind of old way of doing things.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, so, basically, but Talon, and we never, sometimes I'm at sales conference or whatever, and people say, well, what are your, sales criteria for a book? And of course, we have none whatsoever. Pay attention to that. But really, the whole formula for Talon is kind of a mirror image of all the work that Canadian publishers at the provincial and federal level have done to work with funding from the government and obviously the citizens of Canada who like Canadian publishing to provide support. So basically, our revenue model, which is pretty consistent, is pretty much half sales, half grants.
Okay, that's what I was really curious about too. So, we've mentioned, I know I've talked to Dan Wells at Biblioasis a bit about the funding structure that they have, and that it is, what you're saying, like 50-50 split, isn't like totally unusual for a nonprofit press in the United States, except I think with the presses here, it's usually like a significant part of that 50% of the grants are like individual donations, where it seems from, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and maybe just explaining this will make sense, but like it feels like there are a lot more opportunities for grants from governmental and provincial organizations in Canada than there ever are here in the States.
There's a lot more structure to it. Mm-hmm. It does take work, but there's a lot of structure. There's now a lot of continuity. So basically, yeah, it's really fundamentally different. And while it is pretty time consuming, it is also fair. It's quite predictable. We have to do a fair amount of lobbying on a regular basis, but we really managed to maintain these programs. A lot of the literary publishers are probably not 50-50 like we are. They're probably more like 70-30 or even 80-20 as far as grants go to sales, and so they probably earn more grant income.
Okay. I was thinking of that the other way. So they're
no, because a lot of them are smaller than us too. So we actually kind of like cross over from the small to the small medium publisher. Not that that's very big, but we have 8 employees. We have 6 full-time, 2 part-time. We have a cash flow of about $750,000 a year, and so as I say, half of that is grants. So that's obviously pure margin. So in terms of sales, it probably would compute more like to a $1.4 or $1.3 million publishing company. So that's probably on the larger side for the literary organizations, particularly because with all the bad times the whole book industry went through after, say, 2005. There has been sort of some winnowing out and some consolidation. But so in Canada, basically we have the federal support. So the Department of Canadian Heritage takes a commercial interest in publishing, and they have a program for all publishers, not just cultural ones, that provide them with a certain amount of support, mostly on sales up to $400,000. But so there's a whole kind of, so they're just interested in the commercial side of publishing. They also have some programs that are smaller, quite small, but they help with systems and other kinds of stuff in terms of what have you. And it doesn't matter what kind of books you publish, what guidebooks, cookbooks, whatever, you're going to get support from that arm. Wow. And we have the Canada Council. So the Canada Council has a mandate to support cultural in Canada in general, and they have a lot of programs, all music, drama, dance, visual art, and book publishing. So in order to get support for them, you have to, go through a few years of publishing a certain number of cultural titles. And then you also have to apply regularly into their sort of emerging publisher program, and then gradually you come out of that into the established publisher program. Always competing against other publishers along the way, and being compared, and there's juries and all that kind of stuff of your peers. So it's pretty terrible to come out of emerging too early and go into the big program, because at this point this program's been running a long time. There's been all sorts of initiatives at every level to try and modernize publishers and make them better, and tech and digital this and marketing that. And when you get into the big pond, there's some really good publishers, and you're up against competition. So you want to be sharp when you get in there. So, but basically it has to be a cultural book in a recognized genre like drama, fiction, creative nonfiction, poetry, stuff like that, in order to get support from the council. And it's quite a complicated formula that they have, and it's a very extensive, grant application that's probably going to take you at least a few weeks to do. Involves narratives and financial reporting and all this stuff, and sending in the books, and then ultimately a jury by your peers, and then you get award. But those two components are the major components of Canadian funding, and they're substantial. And then you have a kind of mirroring of them in some provinces, particularly Ontario and British Columbia, which are, the big publishing provinces, with Toronto being the main publishing center and then Vancouver being the next one.
Right.
And in both cases, you have arts councils in those two provinces that will, again, support cultural work. And then you normally have some kind of program through the government that's also kind of a percentage of your whatever you're getting from the commercial component of the federal one, Heritage. So kind of mirroring the Heritage one. In this case, it comes in the form of a tax credit, which you get even if you don't pay tax, they're still going to send you the credit. So basically, those are the big four. So you have a kind of commercial component at the provincial level, and then the cultural component at the provincial level, and then you have the commercial component at the federal level, and the cultural component at the federal level.
Wow.
Those are the four. When you take those four together, and if you have a firm of fairly substantial size, and that does a lot of good work, and you're diligent and systematic, then you should be able to get into a position somewhat like Talon, where you're probably, as in our case, half sales, half grants, and you can run a pretty darn, respectable publishing program, do a lot of fabulous books, and keep your production values high, and basically have the infrastructure of a bigger company and a smaller company on an ongoing basis, but not paying big salaries and not making a lot of money for the owners, and hopefully just keeping your nose into the black, because lose too much money, then they'll start to mark you down, and you'll lose marks, and you could potentially come out of either one of the programs. And anytime you lose money in a year, the owner has to personally guarantee that they're going to do everything that they say they're going to do, and spend the money that received from the granting agencies in the appropriate way, and all that kind of stuff. So, unless you have some financial resources of your own, it's pretty tricky, I would say, even with the grant structure, to own a publishing company, because sooner or later, probably sooner rather than later, you're going to have a cash flow money problem, and you're going to have to lend some money to the company.
Yeah.
If you're not in a position to do that, or you don't find a way to do that, it's going to be tough. So I think a lot of small businesses, medium-sized businesses around the world and in North America, that, that's kind of somewhat real estate based, you kind of need probably to own a house or something like that, to give you some sort of ability to have some financial flexibility. So, to get a line of credit for your business, or to get a personal line of credit to be able to lend some money to the firm from time to time. So, so typically you're going to have somebody who, for whatever reason, has maybe had a previous career or whatever, has been able to buy a house for the family along the way, and then they use that to backstop the publishing enterprise.
Interesting. So I'm taking a slightly different direction. There's you guys do primarily Canadian authors. How have you found, we've always had a problem selling our books into Canada. I don't quite understand how the bookstore sales in Canada work for a press like Open Letter. But do you guys have run into difficulties getting the books into the U.S.?
Well, I'm just going to start with one issue before I get to that one, because we have a horrible time getting the books into the U.S. But basically, the reason you're not selling any books in Canada is the Canadian book market is just trash at the moment.
Yeah, what is it? So it's basically like a handful of independents and mostly chapters, right?
Yeah, so chapters / Indigo. So unfortunately the chains became one as time went on. So there's only one of them, and what can you say whenever you have a chain, right? I mean, it's centralized buying. Obviously, the buying isn't as individuated from store to store. The independents that there are now obviously do lots of events, are more tied into the community, and there's more hand selling, and they're more likely to be able to push books, and they're more likely to have long time really nerdy staff and all that kind of stuff, which you just don't find as much in the some of those chain stores do have that, but not the predominance of them. And so When the superstores rolled out, then of course we lost a lot of independents and the superstores, some of them closed. So then maybe we ultimately wound up with less bookstores in the marketplace than we originally had in Vancouver. There's like no big independent or just basically hardly any big new bookstores in town anymore, which just, makes it tough. It's one of the biggest cities. So yeah, the bookstore market is basically a mess. And then the other problem is in the US, in some cases, there's been areas where there are parts of cities where the real estate is affordable. And so people have been able to move into neighborhoods that are being revitalized or are growing, or they're able to take over maybe a chain store location that's closed down or whatever. Whereas the Canadian cities, the commercial real estate market has been tight. It's never really backslid. It's been getting worse and worse. And so it's even harder to find good locations that are affordable rent wise. So basically, yeah, the whole, it's just nasty selling books up here, and it's hard, the market is shot. And BC used to be like one of the best book markets in the world. It was fabulous. You could sell 5,000 copies of a regional title. We had all kinds of bookstores all over, and we just don't anymore. So, yeah, that classic case of why aren't you selling any books up here? Because nobody is.
Yeah. That's kind of a relief to hear in a way.
Yeah, and also a lot of our same thing in terms of media, losing book pages, getting smaller, newspapers closing, hard to get any review coverage, more and more books competing for less and less time, just all those factors. It's pretty terrible. And so selling our books into the States, basically, there's a lot of competition for review media down there too. So it's really hard to get Canadian books reviewed. They're seldom reviewed. And because they're seldom reviewed, we can't get the publicity. And so it's really hard to put them in the bookstores. And so, yeah, it's really hard to sell books down there. If you can start to, some presses have stayed with it a long time, like Orca, children's press in Victoria, Arsenal Pulp, and they've done a good job of finally maybe cracking over in Opens Media. And then you've got to start doing author touring and stuff down there. But it's a tough gig to do author touring down there when you're starting, starting with 70-cent dollars, and it's all going to cost you a third or more to begin with. And how are you going to get people out to events? And Canadian authors is just a vicious snowball. So, yeah, it's really tough. On the other hand, a lot of our sales are academic course adoptions.
Right.
We go to drama shows, like academic drama shows and stuff like that, and libraries and things like that. So most of our sales continue to be through Amazon and the wholesalers and probably into the non-bookstore market. So I still feel like there's room for growth and that we can do the better down there, but it's really hard to capitalize that growth, because you're probably going to have to do a lot of things that aren't really going to get you anywhere before you start to get somewhere. And sometimes it's hard to bring yourself to spend that money. You say, okay, well, if we put $20,000 a year more in marketing over the next 4 years, maybe we can make some headway. The long and short of it is we don't really have $20,000 a year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's tricky. So we continue at Talon. While we do work the trade and stuff, we do continue to really try and maintain our academic and library markets, and our international sales are pretty decent as well. Mm-hmm. So I think we could, I hope to do better in all markets, but same factors I think that everybody finds. You go out with the best will in the world, but it can grind you down a little bit.
I have a question for you, Tom. Is it easier for you guys to sell a book translated from an obscure language or a Canadian author?
Well, New England is a little different because there's so many ties to Quebec. My family is French. But yeah, generally it's much easier to sell the weird book from Hungarian than it is like a straight English Canadian author. It's tough. It's really tough.
And
why is that?
Don't know. I really don't.
And I can get when I translate a French author from France, bang, we get all kinds of coverage down in the States.
Oh yeah,
but not for our Quebec authors. So,
which that's always baffling to me too. Like I'm not quite sure what this like this weird sort of prejudice or wall is, because it doesn't make any sense. Like it's not like Canadian writers writing in English are writing about some like vastly different part of the world that makes no sense to American readers. Like that's just not true. and they're writing about very universal things, and some of them obviously have been incredibly successful. And with Quebec authors, that would seem to make sense too. That like it's I'm reading and the new book by Catherine Leroux, and it's set in Quebec City and Montreal, and it feels like both a somewhat of a foreign book and at the same time places that I've obviously been and like that makes sense. Like I don't quite get why Americans are quick. They just don't pay any attention to Canadian books.
I think there's a little regional sort of bias which exists within American culture as well. Like, if I've got an author from down the street writing about, life in New England or whatever, like that's so much an easier sell than a book about rural Arkansas or something. And it's just the way it is. I mean, and so people feel like Quebec is, not just a foreign country, but one that speaks a foreign language and is like defiantly sort of different and all of those sorts of things. And that's the perception. And they think, well, how could I even penetrate that? Why would I bother?
Yeah, and I can see that more as being an issue on like a individual bookstore level too, but like from like a more general like overview of people that are reading lots of books or writing about them, it seems still underrepresented a bit.
I will say, I mean, the one thing I like about my store, and this is, a little bit of grandstanding, but we just do not pay attention to who publishes the book or, where the author is from or anything like that. If it's a good book, it's a good book. And we just put it out on display and that's that. Mm-hmm. And if people are going to have these biases, and that's on them, we're not going to like try to sell it because it's different. We're not going to try to, presuppose a hesitancy to buy it and then work against that, because then you're just digging yourself into a hole. It's so much easier to just publish good books and put them in booksellers' hands and trust that they will sell. And look, it takes a long time for people like us to discover every small press that's distributed by a consortium or whatever. But, we're trying. And believe me, a lot of good booksellers out there are trying to really get to know these small presses.
And I think Canadian presses are, great. If you can kind of keep working in the States until you're just kind of another indie and not a Canadian press, then I think you're turning the corner. And it has happened with more and more publishers. And I noticed that even, us now in our 5th or 6th year with consortium, it just never really comes up. We're another indie, and that's what I like to be. And Greystone with The Hidden Life of Trees has been hugely successful. And so, Canadian, the thing is, you can't hope to just dip your foot in the market and have a little bit of success or have some success and sort of go in and out. You have to be all in. You have to be consistent. You have to be there. You have to do the shows. You have to have the inventory. You have to go to the sales conferences. And ultimately, you have to do the publicity. And that's still where we at Talon have more work to do. As I say, it's just to find more funding for doing the publicity. But even now we're starting to send, we're sending authors on tour down there and getting more and more successful, particularly with the interest in poetry, the rise of poetry, wanting to have poets and events and bookstores and all that kind of stuff is really kind of, it's a great opportunity for publishers like Talon right now that may not always be there. And a lot of Canadian authors previously have achieved success because they've been published by U.S. publishing houses, and people don't think of them as one author or another, like an Alice Munro or Margaret Atwood or whatever. They're just great authors. So, and that's always a route ultimately for Canadian authors, if they're more successful, is, the agents split off the rights and they're published through U.S. houses, and you don't even know they're Canadian. So that's a different kind of calculus for Canadian publishers, because all that government funding that I was talking about, you only get that for Canadian authors.
Right.
So it does skew your program towards publishing Canadian authors. So are we ghettoized because we ghettoize ourselves? I mean, perhaps we are. Perhaps that is some of our limitations. So if you're going to be in that situation, then, as I say, you have to change course and you have to really be, consistent in your distribution efforts. And also, you have to make some decisions. Like, I get titles. Do I sell off the U.S. rights? And then all the best-selling titles that I produce, I don't actually publish myself, or do we keep them for Talon and use those to try and raise the profile of Talon, which is kind of more what I think publishers, of a little bit of bigger size tend to do.
Yeah, I can imagine, because that makes sense. That's sort of like the selling the UK rights for a book that you're doing here equivalent?
It's very analogous to U.S. publishers trying to publish in the U.K.
Yeah.
They get into it, they find out it's really hard to do and it's expensive, and it's hard to have an office over there. I think there's a little bit more of an illusion in Canada because we're closer that it's easier to do. But on the other hand, I mean, the U.S. market is so big, and it's hard to decide which bites of the apple you want to take.
Yeah, absolutely. So the book selling scene seems a bit jaded up in Canada. Sort of some not. I think the U.S. seems a little bit more optimistic right now in terms of like the number of indie stores that are coming back. There's a new article I saw today that there's a quasi boom in books coverage with like a number of places expanding their coverage and having more books coverage in general, which are two like semi-positive statements for once. But one thing that's sort of unrelated to that, so you guys are in Vancouver. Most of the publishers tend to be in Ontario or in Toronto specifically. Is that true for a lot of the indie presses that they're between those two areas, or are you pretty evenly spread out throughout Canada?
No, those are definitely the two focal points.
Okay.
In British Columbia, there's probably, maybe it would be Vancouver/Victoria, because there is quite a few publishers over in Victoria too. Though in a sense that feels like they're part of the same scene. After that, there's a pretty steep drop off. I mean, there are some publishers in Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's not many, and they're smaller, and a few of those are university presses. And then there's a decent little publishing scene in the Atlantic provinces as well. But again, that's spread out over 3 provinces. So no, it's definitely Ontario and British Columbia. Yeah, but yeah,
I'm sorry.
So altogether, I think it comes to about 130 publishers or so in Canada.
Wow.
All different kinds. Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea what the number would be here, but I suspect it's much, much higher than that.
Oh yeah, it's in the thousands.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah.
I think consortium is over 130.
Oh God, that's true. That's true. There's an announcement today that Ingram's trying to buy Baker and Taylor's retail division.
Wow.
Speaking of,
The article I read in Shelf Awareness asked for reactions from readers, booksellers, presumably, and all I can think is like, obviously this is fucking horrible. This should not be able to happen, but. God damn it.
Does Baker and Taylor service you guys better than Ingram, or is it just 6 on one hand, half dozen on the other?
I will say this. I think it's my experience. I think every bookstore's experience with Baker and Taylor and Ingram is entirely sort of location, in physical location in the country, and then size of store based. So when you only have 5,000 titles, you tend not to have a lot of accounts with all of the actual distributors, the publishers.
Right.
So, for example, we only have accounts with 3 of the big 5. So that's 2, and of course that's the case because we don't get a lot of books from those other 2.
Right.
So for those 2, I'm ordering them from wholesalers. Now, in my situation, I can get books from Ingram faster because of where we're located on the East Coast. But the discount is slightly better with Baker and Taylor.
Okay.
So it's one of these, and they do promotion things. They did a thing all last week of, higher discount for the beginning of the holiday season and all that sort of stuff. I hope I'm not giving anything away here. I think it's all fairly standard. I mean, it's across the industry. Like, this is what Baker and Taylor offers every bookstore in America. I'm not giving some.
That's not. They have to, otherwise it'd be illegal.
Yeah, it'd be illegal. But so I think that's generally people's experience. Customer service is better at Baker and Taylor. Ingram, I have to deal with no matter what because of consortium and PGW. So it's like this weird. You could easily not deal with Baker and Taylor,
right?
But you're smarter too, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
So
you're opposed to the purchase.
I am opposed to the purchase because I fear that Ingram would just lock in whatever not so friendly discount they want and never think twice about it.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's probably true. There are. I guess, does Bookazine still exist for you guys?
I've never ordered from Bookazine at any store I've ever worked at. So,
because Cohen used to be the other, and they're gone. Man, yeah. I guess that's. My thought initially was like, if Ingram had more power, if they're whatever that takes, then maybe the negotiation of the new contract with Amazon won't go as poorly as it sounds like it might go.
there's
Also, hope I'm not giving anything away, but
there's speculation that this whole thing is because Follett, who owns Baker and Taylor, wants to buy B&N.
oh, okay, yeah.
You can't have. I mean, I guess you could, but it would be pretty shady if you had a distribution arm and a bookstore arm.
Well, Barnes and Noble tried to buy Ingram at one point in time.
Yeah, and that got shot down by the
Although I heard from someone that was high up at Barnes & Noble at the time that was all a lie, that they weren't actually serious about that, but they were using it as a distraction while they set up all their BNN.com stuff and rebought BNN.com from like a third company, and like were doing something else that they were more concerned with, and that this thing was sort of like everyone will get all upset about and pay attention to, but we're doing something else that you probably would get upset about if it was the only thing that you were paying attention to.
Isn't that highly illegal?
No, you can. That's just marketing, man. It's just public relations.
But isn't Barnes and Noble a publicly traded stock?
Yeah.
So they intentionally. That seems illegal.
No,
Sorry.
they're not. They weren't manipulating anything. They were interested in buying Ingram, but didn't think it would happen, and knew that it wouldn't happen. For those reasons.
So they're operating in bad faith.
No, I mean, if that had gone through, they would be really powerful. I don't know that it's bad faith so much as like a knowledge that you're not going to get that through. Like there's, like the times that you use like the hairy arm thing, where you're like, I would like to do this, but I'm going to give you one really bad option that people will, pay attention to that and be like, no, that option sucks, so I'll go with this other option. I think it's more along those lines, not like illegal, more of like manipulating the way that people react to stuff. It all sounds sort of illegal, I suppose.
It sounds like it's going against the interests of the board and shareholders, but what do I know? I don't work for corporations.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think that they really did try and buy them, but I think they're also pretty aware that was going to be too sketchy, and for the same reason that Follett wouldn't be able to buy Barnes & Noble if they had a distribution arm as well, that someone will shut the FTC or whoever will shut that down. And so as they were doing that, they were able to do other things related to BNN.com and their infrastructure with that was advantageous to them, that would have gotten more public outcry at the time, but all the outcry was about like, you cannot go through this Ingram deal. And then that was officially like blocked, from what I remember, by the FTC, I believe, saying that was like illegal, like too much of a monopolistic situation. So I think that they were sort of aware that that was a probable outcome, or like but that if they could have bought it, that would have been gold for them.
Right.
In the European markets, there's a lot of vertical integration, and most of the distributors do own bookstores as well.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying it's a good model, but it's sort of definitely, in the book business, there's not a lot new when you look through the history, and there's definitely, especially in the French model, it's pretty consistent.
Right.
I think we always want, hopefully we have competition in the system. Otherwise, as you say, the discounts get out of whack and service gets out of whack. And so, I mean, go down to only one wholesaler or one this or that. It's never going to be a good lot.
Oh, and 7 out of 10 best books of the year are from Penguin Random House.
Wow.
Doesn't feel very good. Doesn't feel very diverse.
But one thing that's been going, I think there is more recognition of indie publishing, and certainly in Canada in the last few years, the indies have been able to wrest a number of those spots away from Penguin and Random. So
that's my sense of things. So is that actually true? Because like that was always my sense that like Big Oasis in particular would talk about the Giller Prize and like some of those bigger awards that they were like nominated rather frequently or shortlisted. And that those seem like the sort of prizes that, and the U.S. equivalent is always going to be the big five, and maybe Grey Wolf, who's like isn't one of those, but isn't that far away either.
I don't know if it's because of the judges or what's going on, but there's been real penetration of of all the awards and lists and everything by the independents, and maybe it's because Penguin and Random House and stuff are just not publishing as much mid-list anymore either. So, but yeah, so there's probably a lot of a discrepancy in terms of the amount of books sold in the marketplace and the recognition of books in terms of market share of the big guys and the indies right now.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the ability of Penguin Random House to put books in the marketplace and to sell them through is much higher. And, they've got control over the high volume outlets like, Indigo or Costco or whatever. So, they continue to do, maybe not on a lot of titles, but on a decent number of titles, they continue to do much better, numbers than we seem to be able to do. Yeah. Mind you, they take the risk, right? If Indigo says to them, okay, well, fine, we'll take 10,000, they give them 10,000, whereas obviously we wouldn't.
Fair point. Tom, do you have other questions about Canadian publishing?
No, I mean, I'm a little curious about if Canadian publishing is more like American publishing or more like UK publishing or even continental publishing, in that there's like what the percentage of stuff that's translated, if when books are translated from, say, European countries, do they come with built-in sort of audiences, unlike here in the States where, I mean, I feel like we're starting from scratch with every author, even if they've published 10 amazing books in another language. What's your sense of how the rest of the world is received in Canadian publishing?
It's much more like pretty close to the U.S. market, that selling translations is really tough, that you are starting from probably less than zero, that, you can't get any media for them, so it's really hard to break them out. So you can't tour them. So there's almost no way to build market for those books. And so I think it's a very similar situation. And it's not like the UK where people are traveling to those countries and getting some spillover media from them and, watching Frankfurt Book TV and stuff like that. It's just not like that. So I think it's a lot more, like the US, a lot more of an isolated market. And you only sell those translated titles when, for some reason, an author has caught hold and it's been built up over time, or some TV adaptation or something or another. But yeah, it's really tough. And there's not a lot of bookstores, and there's not a lot of room in the ones there are. So probably the only thing that does help is literary festivals. I think are pretty good at bringing in some of the translated authors into every festival, at least some of them. And so that can help at least give you a tiny foothold. But no, it's tough.
I got an email just the other day from someone asking, I believe they're writing an article about something, and their editor was asking what percentage of books published in Canada are in translation. Do you think it matches our frequently and possibly incorrect 3% number, or is it something much different because of the funding for Quebec authors?
It's probably a little bit different. It's probably more like 6% or something, okay, because funding for Quebec authors. Yeah. So, there's a decent number of titles translated from Quebec every year, even more so because there's been a big push on over the last 3-4 years. So I would say that definitely tips the scales, but you're still not really, it's still really hard to surface, even with more books coming, surface of books in the marketplace.
Yeah.
It's really tough. And in our case, we're still seen to be on the downward slide as far as newspapers, magazines, and review coverage goes. So it's getting even tougher.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I buy this resurgence of books coverage article. Sure, there are a couple examples, but it doesn't feel like there's a lot more diversity coming yet. So
I think you're still battling, in a way to do your own media and do more stuff on your website and try and find more alternative ways of getting news out there. And nothing, the great thing that we liked about reviews is kind of the agenda setting nature that people used to have in relationship to newspapers, is that people would allow their entertainment agendas to be set by the newspapers. And so things would be reviewed and people would follow them. So now we don't, I think some of the new media doesn't have the agenda setting power that the previous ones they do. They may be reviewed there, but I don't think people necessarily are using them as much to actually let it influence their buying and reading decisions. So there's also a disconnect there, which is this is the root of major publishing problems now for publishers at every level.
Yeah, very true.
I have no problem with that. I don't necessarily believe that we should turn to 4 or 5 media outlets for our taste making. So.
No, I don't. But if you like get a group of people in a room and start to talk to them about how they buy books and stuff, the people who buy the most amount of books, they will go out and go into bookstores and browse and all that stuff and find their own things to read. Whereas, somebody who's only reading 4 to 8 books a year, they just don't want to take any risks on the book they read, and they want to read a book that they heard that's well reviewed, or friends told them that's good, that's popular, that they can talk about with other people. So, in terms of trying to service like all parts of the book reading community, that's where we need that aspect.
I can imagine. I wrote something that went online today that had comments very similar to that about like the readers that aren't avid readers, the readers that are the like 2 books a year reader, and that's where like these kind of lists and bestseller things really matter. They don't really matter to most of us that are listening to this podcast or talking on it, but they do to like my aunt who's only gonna get the perfect nanny.
Yeah, and it's critical. We need all parts of the book buying public really to make the thing work. So
there is, yeah. I don't have any other questions for you. Do you, Tom?
No, that was my big question, like just about that. And I get the impression just from listening to you talk that Canadian booksellers don't have these sort of regulations that they do in France, for example, where they're not allowed to discount anything, correct?
Nope. We don't have any of that, and there's lots of room to move on price, and like you can have big sales, and you can. A lot of booksellers, of course, have year-end pre-inventory sales and Christmas sales and all kinds of other stuff. So that's all open territory. I think what works in the bookselling model in Canada right now, as a lot of what works in the States, is you need to be integrated in your community. You've got to do a lot of events. So most of the good bookstores now are doing new and used to try and get the better margin out of the used and the traffic created by the new. You need good booksellers. You need people who know books and who know how to, like somebody comes in the store and asks you a question that you can't answer about a book that you have in the store, you're not going to make the sale. If somebody comes into the store and you can figure out what it is they're going on about, put that book in their hands, and you've made the sale. And that's really just fundamental to everyday bookselling practice. So, but it's the place of the bookstore in the community that remains really important. And for that, you need people in the bookstore who are good community people. So.
Yeah, Is there a good community of booksellers in Canada that are like I don't know, like there's like sort of a history of it in the States in particular of like young cool booksellers that grow up, take over stores, buy their own stores like Tom did, or make their own store, or like and are very invested in bookselling as a career. Is that the case in Canada as well?
We're not where we used to be. We used to have a strong bookselling association. They had a strong convention. People would come. There was lots of, professional development. The community was well integrated. Penguin Random House pulled it. This convention was sold to read. Prices went up. Penguin Random House pulled out of the convention. The convention folded. Not too long after, the Booksellers Association folded, or at least we became part of the larger retail organization, which didn't really work out. And so consequently, there's just a lot, the community isn't as tight, and they're not able to work together as well as they have in the past. And hopefully they'll regroup in the next couple of years and get it back together. But yeah, the selling of the show was bad.
Oh yeah. I kind of remember that crisis happening some years ago.
Yeah, when you do away with your convention, it has a lot of other side effects of publishers and booksellers not getting to know each other, people who book in not getting to know each other, so that people can understand who's out there for changing jobs and all that stuff. Professional development, buzz, goes on and on.
So one last question I have for you that's a general one, is or more specific one, I mean, is which book fairs are you coming to in the States this year? Are you going to like MLA, ALA? Where could people find you if they're booksellers or librarians or others?
Well, this year we're going to be doing ALA midwinter.
Okay.
Because it's in Seattle, and then I think ALA proper is in Washington, D.C. So I think we're going to do ALA instead of midwinter. We'll be doing the Association of Theater for Higher Education. We'll be doing AWP, and I haven't quite made up my mind about BEA yet. So yeah, you can see us in all those places, and get to know Talon Books.
Very cool. Yeah, what's one Talon book that you would recommend?
The one Talon book that we've got coming out in 2019. It's the perfect winter book. It's called The Weight of Snow. It won the Governor's General's Award in France. It's been sold in 10 different countries. It's sold about 30,000 copies so far. Basically, it reads like a thriller, but it's a very literary book. A couple of guys, one of whom's injured, trapped in a cabin while the power's out all across the country, and you go through the sequence of winter with the snow getting higher and higher, and does a lot of fantastic stuff in there. There is no better book to be sitting, inside on a cold winter day reading than Weight of Snow. So that's the big one for us.
And who's the author?
Guy-Poliquin.
Okay.
Guy-Poliquin. Yeah. So
check that out. It's nice and snowy here, or it has been for the past couple of days. So good time for that.
Perfect. The form of the book, the structure, the tension, everything. It's and just the feeling as you come out of the winter. It's fantastic. So I'm really excited about this one.
Very cool. Very cool. Tom, did you have anything like a rant or rave that you wanted to give besides the fact that your Ohio State Buckeyes got shut out of the college playoffs?
I'm not going to comment on that. I would just say, speaking of Guy-Poliquin, I read Running on Fumes, and it was fantastic. Well,
this is the follow-up to Running on Fumes. So basically, it's the same main character. It's a standalone novel, but it does follow on from when he's come back to the village where he was driving back to find his father, and takes off from there. I think it's got even better form and pace than Running on Fumes. Still has those kind of mythological overtones. There's a great dialogue about technology and non-technology. There's a wonderful counterpoint about the relationship between caregiver and the person being looked after, the pace and everything. So yeah, I'm glad you read Running on Fumes. This one's more than fulfills the potential of that book. So our translation was a little delayed, but in the way that's worked well for us because we'll be publishing this spring along with the book in 10 other countries. So. Oh,
cool. Very cool. I'll have a link to it in the show notes to this too.
But Chad, I wanted to perhaps make you angry by telling you that I just started reading the latest Matthias Énard.
Oh, I don't like that book.
Really? I think it's fucking fantastic.
We passed on it a long time ago.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about, because I noticed it when I started it, that it's 2010, so...
Yeah, EJ really didn't like that book either. I wasn't big on it. Yeah, you can have fun with that. We're trying to get the rights to do a new 10th anniversary edition of Zone, though, by the way.
Oh.
Which would be good, since that's his best book. You're welcome. No, but that's cool. I have it. I'm just going to read the whole thing now that it's been translated, but I have so many other books that I'm more interested in than that I just not. It's way down on the pile right now.
Yeah, I wasn't sure I was going to like it, but I figured it was coming out and it was sitting there.
Yeah. I'm almost finished with Patient X, though. I think I have like an hour and a half of the audiobook left, which is like 40 pages maybe or something.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm almost there. I do like that quite a bit too. I kind of wish I hadn't listened to all. I listened to most of it on the audiobook, but with the Kindle version, so I could see it, because it was getting tricky to know when it went into like italics or switched character viewpoints. It was a little bit difficult to listen to as the audiobook, which was disappointing. But it's pretty cool. But mainly, I've been reading the second part of the Fresán trilogy, the Dreamed part, and it's wild and amazing, but. I'm only like half. I don't even know if I'm halfway through, because it's big. But that's not till November of 2019.
Oh God. Okay.
Yeah, but we were gonna have galleys at Winter Institute, like a handful of them for like the fans, and then we'll have the real galleys in like March or April. But but I need to get like, there's not a, I mean, Will Vanderheiden translated it, so there's not a lot of like questions about the translation, but there's like some typos or like little minor things. So I'm just going to I'm trying to fix all those right now so that we can have something that's pretty almost finished for, 5-10 people at Winter Institute. And that's it.
Great.
And then, but then we can
know
pump
who
it
they
out.
are.
What's that?
I know who they all are.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. Yeah. Well, I think some of them won't be there, so they're going to get theirs in the mail. But yeah, more or less. Although that's one of our big hopes for the next fall. See if we can actually really, really break out.
It's not a bad one to gamble on.
No, and we've still got the third book after that, so, and Mantra and more, so it'd be great. There's a section that I think I'm getting to now that's a huge Nabokov section too.
Oh, cool.
So we'll see. I haven't hit that yet. I've gotten there's the most recent like book reference that was like kind of a frame for the section was about Wuthering Heights, which is also kind of cool. But anyways, I don't have anything else to add. I've been reading a bunch of stuff, but nothing that's like super exciting, worth noting.
The last thing I wanted to say today is tomorrow marks 1 year since Riff Raff opened, and yeah.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
Yeah, congrats.
If you're in the Providence area, come down Friday night for a party, and I don't know, raffles. We'll give some books away, and that sort of thing.
That's really cool.
Speaking of which, I have to go to work right
All
now.
right, it's been great joining you guys.
Yeah,
and talking
thanks.
with Chad. I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on and talking with us.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys. All the best.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.